I watched from the bay window of my secret mansion as my children stood speechless in the nursing home parking lot, staring at the $2.8 million property where I now lived, just 100 yards from the facility they'd left me in after convincing me to sign over my family home for estate planning purposes. Some lessons about respecting your elders can't be taught with words alone. Before we dive deeper, tell me where you're watching from in the comments, and if this story resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've got something extra special coming your way. I, Margaret Elizabeth Donovan, was never supposed to be wealthy. Born in 1953 in the struggling coal town of Millridge, Pennsylvania, I entered a world where financial security was something we read about in magazines, not something we experienced in our daily lives. Our neighborhood consisted of modest company houses occupied by miners, factory workers, and shopkeepers, hardworking people who measured wealth not in dollars, but in how they treated others and what they built for future generations. My father, William Donovan, worked punishing shifts in the Millridge Coal Company mine, his lungs gradually darkening with the coal dust that would eventually claim his life too early. He would return home each evening, his face blackened except for the rings around his eyes where his protective goggles had been, his shoulders stooped from hours spent in tunnels barely tall enough to stand in. Despite the physical toll, he never complained. "The work is hard," he'd say, "but it lets me give you all something better than I had." My mother, Helen, transformed our simple two-bedroom company house into a place where anyone experiencing hardship could find comfort and a hot meal, regardless of their circumstances. She had been a school teacher before marrying my father, one of the few women in our town with education beyond high school. Though she gave up formal teaching to raise me and my younger brother Thomas, she never stopped being an educator. Our kitchen table was as much a classroom as it was a dining area. "The measure of a person isn't what they own," my father would say, his voice gravelly from years of coal dust, "but what they build that outlasts them." This philosophy guided our family's approach to everything from household finances to community involvement. While we had little in material terms, we cultivated resourcefulness and foresight with religious dedication. Millridge in the 1950s and 60s was a town slowly dying, though most of us were too close to see it clearly. The coal industry that had built the community was beginning its long, painful decline. Many families simply lived day to day, paycheck to paycheck, finding comfort in television shows that portrayed an American prosperity that seemed to exist everywhere except our town. Our street, Maple Avenue, was lined with nearly identical company houses, each with a small patch of yard and a front porch where neighbors would gather on summer evenings. The Wilsons lived to our left. Henry worked alongside my father in the mines while his wife Clara served as the town's midwife. The Johnsons lived to our right. Samuel drove the delivery truck for Millridge General Store, and Elizabeth ran a small seamstress business from their front room. These neighbors and a dozen others on our street formed an extended family of sorts, each household contributing what skills and resources they had to the collective well-being of our little community. My childhood was shaped by watching my parents plan carefully for the future, despite limited means. I observed my mother preserve and can vegetables from our small garden to feed us through winter. In August, our kitchen would transform into a steamy workshop, as ball jars filled with tomatoes, green beans, and pickles, each carefully processed to last until the next growing season. Nothing was wasted. Even apple cores and peels were turned into jelly. I watched my father repair our home and help neighbors with theirs, teaching me that maintenance and care extended the life of everything. On weekends, when he wasn't working overtime at the mine, he would tackle an endless list of projects, patching the roof, insulating the attic, rebuilding the back steps. "Fix it right the first time, Maggie," he'd tell me as I handed him tools, "and you won't have to fix it again next year." Most importantly, I witnessed how they managed the resources they had with disciplined intention rather than impulsive desires. Payday in our household followed a ritual. At the kitchen table, my mother would carefully divide my father's earnings into labeled envelopes: rent, groceries, utilities, church, savings, and education. The education envelope, though often the thinnest, was treated with particular reverence. "This is your future, Maggie, and Tommy's too," my mother would say, placing $1 or sometimes just coins into the envelope. "It might not look like much today, but over time, it will grow into something significant." This lesson in patience and compounding wasn't just theoretical. Each December, my mother would open the education envelope and show us how the small, weekly contributions had accumulated. Then she would take us to the Millridge Savings and Loan to deposit the sum into our college accounts. The teller, Mrs. Patterson, would make a show of counting the money, mostly singles and coins, before updating our passbook with the new balance and calculating the interest earned. "Look at that, Margaret," Mrs. Patterson would say, pointing to the interest column. "That's money you didn't have to work for. That's your money working for you." By age 12, I had established my own system for saving, using old coffee cans hidden in my closet, one for immediate needs, one for short-term goals, and most importantly, one labeled future, that remained untouched even when temptations arose. I earned money babysitting for neighboring families, helping older residents with grocery shopping, and during summer, picking strawberries at Falwell Farm outside town. While other children spent their earnings on records and movies at the Millridge Cinema, I divided mine with methodical precision: 30% to immediate for small pleasures like books or ice cream, 30% to soon for larger purchases like a new winter coat or school supplies. 40% always went to future, the untouchable fund that represented possibilities beyond Millridge. Most folks spend first and save what's left, which usually means saving nothing, my father explained one evening while helping me count my savings. Smart people save first and spend what remains. It's a small difference that changes everything. I remember looking up from the neat piles of coins on my bedroom floor, struck by the simple wisdom in his words. At 12, I couldn't fully grasp the implications, but something about the principle resonated deeply. It wasn't just about money, it was about priorities, about making deliberate choices rather than falling into default patterns. This simple reversal of conventional behavior became my guiding principle long before I understood its significance. By 14, I had opened my own account at Millridge Savings and Loan, separate from the one my parents maintained for my education. Mrs. Patterson, impressed by my regular deposits, gave me a real ledger book to track my balance, interest, and financial goals. "You've got a good head for numbers, Margaret," she observed after I calculated the compound interest correctly before she could. "You keep this up, and you'll go places most Millridge kids only dream about." By 16, while friends were saving for prom dresses or makeup, I had accumulated enough to make my first investment: shares in Rexford Manufacturing, a company 20 miles from Millridge that my father believed would grow due to government contracts for military equipment during the Vietnam War. The company made specialized communications gear, and as my father pointed out, wars may come and go, but governments will always need ways to talk to their soldiers. The decision to invest raised eyebrows among my peers who couldn't understand delaying gratification for such a distant, uncertain goal. Linda Beaumont, the most popular girl in our class, was particularly vocal about her confusion. "I don't get it, Maggie," she said during lunch in the Millridge High cafeteria. "You could have the prettiest dress at prom, but instead you bought, what, a piece of paper that says you own part of some factory you've never even seen?" I remember smiling at her bewilderment. "I don't own the factory, Linda. I own a small part of what the factory produces, now and in the future. The dress would be worn once and then hung in my closet, but this investment keeps working for me even when I'm sleeping." She rolled her eyes, clearly unconvinced, and changed the subject to Bobby Wilson asking her to prom. I didn't mind. Even then, I recognized that we were operating with fundamentally different assumptions about what mattered and why. Our modest circumstances meant college wasn't expected for a girl from our neighborhood in the early 1970s. My brother Tommy was naturally assumed to be college-bound if his grades merited it, but for girls in Millridge, the typical path led to marriage, motherhood, or perhaps work as a secretary or nurse if you were particularly ambitious. Neither of my parents had education beyond high school, their schooling cut short by the practical necessity of earning income during difficult times. Yet they spoke of education with reverence and created in me a determination to achieve what they hadn't been able to pursue. Throughout high school, I maintained a meticulous academic record while continuing to build my financial foundation. When my Rexford manufacturing stock increased in value by nearly 70% over 2 years, I reinvested the proceeds in a small, diversified portfolio based on research I conducted at the Millridge Public Library. The librarian, Mrs. Winters, began setting aside relevant sections from the Wall Street Journal and Forbes magazine for me, recognizing my unusual interest in financial matters. "You should consider studying finance or economics in college," she suggested one afternoon as I pored over annual reports. "You have an aptitude that shouldn't go to waste." The possibility of college had always been present in my mind, but Mrs. Winters's comment crystallized something important. There were fields of study precisely aligned with my natural interests and abilities. That evening, I borrowed a catalog for Pennsylvania State University from the library's reference section and spent hours analyzing degree programs, course requirements, and career pathways. Throughout my senior year, I applied for every scholarship available, wrote essays for national competitions, and worked multiple jobs to bolster my college fund. My parents contributed what they could, which wasn't much with my father's health beginning to decline from coal dust in his lungs, but their emotional support never wavered. The day I brought home my acceptance letter to Pennsylvania State University, along with my detailed financial plan for attending without burdening my parents, was the first and only time I saw my father cry. He sat at our kitchen table, letter in one hand, my financial spreadsheets in the other, silent tears cutting tracks through the coal dust he hadn't yet washed away after his shift. Those tears, quickly wiped away with coal-stained fingers, taught me more about the value of planning than any words could have conveyed. It wasn't just that I had been accepted. It was that I had made it possible through years of small, consistent actions that had accumulated into something transformative. "How did you manage this?" my mother asked later that evening, examining the papers showing scholarship funds, campus job arrangements, and the savings I'd accumulated. "I learned from watching you both," I said simply. Small actions over time create possibilities that seem impossible at the start. The summer before college was bittersweet. My father's health continued to deteriorate, the chronic cough becoming more severe despite the medications Dr. Martin prescribed. I worried about leaving home with his condition worsening, but both my parents insisted I not delay my education. "You going to college is the best medicine I could ask for," my father said during one of his better days, as we sat on the front porch watching thunderclouds gather over the hills. "Knowing you'll have opportunities I couldn't give your mother, that's worth more than any pill." I arrived at Pennsylvania State University in August 1971, one of the few students from Millridge to ever attend college, and certainly the only one who arrived with both an investment portfolio and a comprehensive financial plan for the next 4 years. My roommate, Barbara Henderson from Philadelphia's Main Line, was initially confused by my careful budgeting and work schedule at the university library. "Why are you working so hard?" she asked during our first month. "College is supposed to be fun. Your parents should be handling the bills." I tried explaining my background, but the gulf between Millridge and mainline Philadelphia proved difficult to bridge. Barbara's father was an executive at a pharmaceutical company. Her mother had never worked outside their home. The concept of educational funding being a collective family sacrifice requiring years of preparation was foreign to her experience. Those university years expanded my understanding of financial systems beyond the practical management I'd observed growing up. Majoring in business administration with a focus on finance, I discovered the architecture of wealth creation. How money could work for you instead of you working for it, how timing affected outcomes, and most importantly, how fundamental principles of disciplined resource management applied equally to household budgets and global corporations. Professor James Harrison, who taught investment strategy, became a particularly important mentor. After I stayed after class one day to ask detailed questions about bond yield calculations, he invited me to participate in a special investment club he ran for his most promising students. Most undergraduates can't see beyond the next weekend, he told me. You're thinking decades ahead. That's rare and valuable. The club met weekly in the economics building basement, where 8 students from various backgrounds analyzed market trends, researched companies, and made collective investment decisions with a small pool of capital Professor Harrison had established. Unlike my other classes, which were predominantly male, this was 1972 after all, the investment club had 3 other women, including Teresa Chen, who would later become my business partner. While fellow students participated in Vietnam protests and women's liberation marches, causes I supported philosophically but engaged with differently, I focused on mastering the tools that would allow me to navigate economic systems effectively. I understood instinctively that meaningful independence required both principled idealism and practical capability, particularly for a woman from my background who couldn't rely on family connections or inherited privilege. My father died during my junior year, his lungs finally surrendering to the coal dust they had filtered for 3 decades. I returned to Millridge for the funeral, struck by how the town seemed smaller than I remembered, more faded and tired. Nearly everyone at the service worked for the mining company, and I couldn't help noticing how many of the men coughed just like my father had in his early years. After the service, Mr. Jenkins, my father's shift supervisor, approached me with an envelope. "Your dad asked me to give you this if anything happened to him," he said, pressing it into my hands. "Said you'd know what to do with it." Inside was my father's life insurance policy, a modest $5,000 sum, along with a handwritten note. "Maggie, this isn't much, but it's what I could do. Don't use it for bills or the funeral. Put it toward building something that will outlast both of us. That's how you measure a life. Love, Dad." I returned to university with new determination. The insurance money was invested in a carefully researched portfolio of stocks in industries I believed would shape the future: early computing companies, telecommunications firms developing cellular technology, and medical research corporations. It wasn't a large sum by investment standards, but it represented something far more valuable than its dollar amount. It was my father's final lesson in leveraging limited resources for maximum long-term impact. My senior year brought job offers from several financial institutions, including 2 Wall Street firms seeking to diversify their predominantly male workforces. The salaries were impressive, especially for someone from my background, but something about the corporate culture felt at odds with the principles that had guided my development. During the campus recruitment season, I met Harold Wilson, a 1965 Penn State graduate who had returned to interview candidates for his regional investment firm, Keystone Capital Management. Unlike the slick Wall Street recruiters with their standardized questions and rehearsed speeches about opportunity, Harold asked thoughtful questions about my investment philosophy and long-term goals. "We're not the biggest firm, and we certainly don't pay Wall Street salaries," he acknowledged during our interview. "But we believe in building wealth steadily through careful analysis and patient capital appreciation. No get-rich-quick schemes or high-risk speculation. From what Professor Harrison tells me, that aligns with your approach." I accepted Harold's offer, recognizing something of my parents' values in Keystone's patient, principled approach to wealth management. The starting salary was modest, compared to the New York offers, But the location in Pittsburgh meant I could visit my mother in Millridge regularly while still building a career in finance. Before graduation, I made one final visit to the investment club, where Professor Harrison offered parting advice that would shape my professional development. Finance can be practiced in two fundamentally different ways, Margaret. You can view it as a game where the goal is to extract maximum profit regardless of broader consequences, or you can see it as a tool for building sustainable prosperity across generations. Choose wisely. As I prepared to leave the university, that had expanded my horizons beyond what anyone from Millridge could have imagined, I reflected on the journey from coffee can savings to formal financial education. The principles hadn't changed: disciplined resource management, patient capital appreciation, investment in future possibilities, but my capacity to implement them had grown exponentially. What remained to be seen was how these principles would translate into a world far more complex than either Millridge or university had prepared me for. Pittsburgh in 1975 was a city in transition. The steel industry that had defined the region for generations was showing early signs of the decline that would devastate the area in the coming decade. But from my small apartment in Shadyside, a neighborhood of tree-lined streets and brick apartment buildings, I saw something different: opportunity in the midst of change. My position at Keystone Capital Management began modestly, analyzing investment opportunities for the firm's established clients, most of whom were men 20 to 30 years my senior, who had inherited family wealth or built it through traditional manufacturing businesses. Initially, some were skeptical about taking advice from a young woman barely out of college, especially one who lacked the polished accent and social connections of their usual financial advisors. "You're from Millridge?" one client asked during an early meeting, his tone suggesting he'd never heard of the place, despite it being less than 100 miles from Pittsburgh. What could someone from a coal town possibly know about managing real money? Harold Wilson, who had hired me and served as my mentor at the firm, intervened before I could respond. "Mr. Blackwood, Margaret grew her first investment by 70% when she was still in high school. She graduated top of her class at Penn State's finance program, and she understands something about money that many born to wealth never learn: the discipline of building something from nearly nothing." This vote of confidence from Harold, combined with my thorough research and clear investment recommendations, gradually earned me respect among the firm's conservative clientele. By my second year, I had built a small portfolio of my own clients, mostly professional women and small business owners who appreciated my detailed approach and straightforward communication style. While my professional life was developing steadily, my personal connections remained limited. Pittsburgh's social scene in the mid-1970s was still largely organized around established family networks, country clubs, and university alumni associations, none of which were natural entry points for a woman from Millridge whose free time was primarily devoted to professional development and caring for my widowed mother back home. Every other weekend, I would drive my second-hand Chevrolet Nova back to Millridge to check on my mother, whose arthritis was steadily worsening. These visits provided grounding in reality that some of my colleagues at Keystone seemed to lack: regular reminders of how precarious financial security could be for most Americans, especially aging women without substantial resources of their own. "You work too hard, Margaret," my mother would often say as I helped her with household repairs or stocked her pantry with groceries. "There's more to life than just preparing for the future." "I'm not just working for the future," I would respond, though perhaps not entirely truthfully. "I'm building something that will provide security for both of us." By 1978, my mother's health had deteriorated to the point where the stairs in her Millridge home had become a daily hazard. After careful consideration, I made the decision to move her to Pittsburgh, purchasing a small ranch-style house in a modest neighborhood where she could live safely on one level while being close enough for me to visit daily. The purchase of that house, my first real estate investment, taught me valuable lessons about property ownership, mortgage financing, and the emotional weight of providing physical shelter for someone you love. I approached the transaction with the same methodical analysis I applied to stock investments, researching neighborhood growth patterns, property tax histories, and potential appreciation factors. Most people buy houses based on emotional reactions, Harold observed when I mentioned the purchase during a lunch break. You're treating it like a portfolio edition with a personal component. That's unusually clear-headed. A house is both a home and an asset, I replied. Recognizing both aspects seems sensible, not special. This balanced perspective on property, understanding its dual nature as both emotional shelter and financial investment, would eventually become the foundation of my most successful business ventures. But in 1978, it was simply the practical approach of a coal miner's daughter, who had learned early that resources were too precious to be allocated without careful consideration of both immediate needs and future implications. My professional advancement at Keystone accelerated during the economic volatility of the late 1970s. While many investment professionals panicked during periods of high inflation and market uncertainty, I recognized patterns similar to what I had observed in Millridge's declining economy throughout my childhood. Systemic changes that created both casualties and opportunities. By 1980, I had been promoted to senior investment advisor, managing portfolios for some of the firm's most substantial clients. My investment philosophy, heavily influenced by my upbringing, emphasized resilience and adaptability over rapid growth, qualities that proved valuable during a period of economic turbulence that unsettled many traditional investors. It was during this period that my professional path converged with Daniel Sullivan, a commercial real estate developer whose family had been in Pittsburgh for generations. Daniel had inherited a modest portfolio of commercial properties from his father, and unlike many second-generation wealth holders, had significantly expanded the holdings through shrewd acquisitions in emerging neighborhoods. Our initial meeting was purely professional. Daniel was seeking investment advice for liquid assets separate from his real estate holdings. But our conversation quickly expanded beyond standard financial planning when I questioned his portfolio allocation strategy. "You're heavily weighted toward fixed income investments," I observed after reviewing his existing holdings. "That's unusually conservative for someone with your risk tolerance and time horizon, especially given current inflation rates." Daniel smiled, the expression softening his otherwise serious features. "Most advisors just nod and agree with whatever I suggest. You're the first to actually challenge my thinking." "I'm not being paid to agree with you," I replied. "I'm being paid to help you make optimal decisions about your resources." This directness, so different from the deferential approach he was accustomed to, sparked a professional relationship that gradually evolved into something more personal. Over the following months, our meetings extended beyond the scheduled hour, conversations flowing from investment strategies to broader economic trends to eventually more personal topics. Daniel was a widower, his wife having died from breast cancer 5 years earlier, leaving him to raise their 2 children, Elizabeth, then 12, and James, 10. Unlike the aggressive, status-conscious developers who were becoming prominent in the emerging Reagan era, Daniel approached both business and parenting with a thoughtfulness that reminded me of my father's measured wisdom. "Buildings are important," he told me during a dinner that blurred the line between professional and personal, "but they're ultimately just structures. The real value is in creating spaces that serve people's needs and stand the test of time." That's what my father taught me, and what I hope to teach my children. This perspective, prioritizing lasting value over quick profit, resonated deeply with the principles that had guided my own development. By early 1981, our professional relationship had evolved into a romance that surprised both of us with its intensity and natural ease. Marriage followed in 1982, a small ceremony in the garden of Daniel's Shadyside home, attended by our closest friends, my mother in her wheelchair, and Daniel's children, who regarded their father's new relationship with the complicated emotions typical of adolescents adjusting to family reconfiguration. Elizabeth, at 14, maintained a polite but distant relationship with me, careful to establish that while she accepted my presence in their home, she preserved special status as the woman of the house since her mother's death. James, at 12, was more openly welcoming, perhaps because he had fewer conscious memories of his mother, and more immediately appreciated having a maternal figure who took genuine interest in his activities and development. They'll adjust at their own pace, Daniel assured me when I expressed concern about Elizabeth's reserved response to our marriage. She's protective of her mother's memory and her special relationship with me. That's natural and appropriate. Give her time to discover that love isn't a zero-sum equation. This patience, allowing relationships to develop organically rather than forcing prescribed patterns, characterized Daniel's approach to family integration. Unlike many men of his generation, he didn't expect me to abandon my professional identity, to become primarily a homemaker and mother. Instead, he supported my continuing career while we gradually established new family rhythms that accommodated everyone's needs and priorities. By 1984, significant transitions were underway in both my professional and personal life. My mother passed away peacefully in her sleep, the arthritis that had caused her such pain finally releasing its hold. Her modest house, which I had purchased 6 years earlier, had appreciated substantially due to neighborhood improvements and Pittsburgh's partial economic recovery. Rather than selling the property, I maintained it as a rental, my first independent real estate investment separate from Daniel's established business. Professionally, I had reached a decision point at Keystone. While the firm had provided excellent foundation for my career, I increasingly found its traditional approach limiting. Harold Wilson, my original mentor, had retired, and the new management was shifting toward more aggressive, transaction-focused investment strategies that prioritized short-term commissions over long-term client outcomes. During this period of professional reassessment, my Penn State Investment Club colleague Teresa Chen re-entered my life through an unexpected phone call. Teresa had spent the past decade working for major financial institutions in New York and Hong Kong, developing expertise in emerging markets and alternative investments rarely considered by traditional Pittsburgh firms like Keystone. "I'm relocating to Pittsburgh," she explained during our first lunch reunion. "My parents are aging, and I want to be closer to them. But I'm not interested in joining an established firm and adapting to their outdated methodologies. I'm considering starting my own advisory practice focused on forward-thinking investment strategies that most traditional managers are too conservative to explore." The timing of Teresa's proposal aligned perfectly with my growing dissatisfaction at Keystone. After careful discussion with Daniel, who supported the entrepreneurial risk despite its implications for our family's financial stability, I made the decision to partner with Teresa in establishing Chen Sullivan Financial Advisors in early 1985. Our business model represented significant departure from Pittsburgh's traditional financial services landscape. Rather than focusing exclusively on wealthy individuals with established portfolios, we created a tiered service approach that included options for emerging professionals and small business owners with meaningful but more modest assets. We emphasized education alongside management, helping clients understand investment principles rather than simply executing transactions on their behalf. Most radically for 1985, we integrated traditional investment vehicles with selective real estate opportunities, leveraging my experience with residential properties and Daniel's commercial development expertise to create diversified portfolio options rarely available through conventional advisory firms. The early years of Chen Sullivan were challenging but exhilarating. Operating from modest offices in an emerging commercial district, we gradually built clientele that appreciated our innovative approach and educational emphasis. By 1990, we had established solid reputation among Pittsburgh's forward-thinking professionals and entrepreneurs, many of whom were themselves breaking from traditional business models. Throughout this period of professional growth, family dynamics continued evolving in complex ways. Elizabeth had left for college at Wellesley, her relationship with me warming gradually through the physical distance that allowed her to establish independent identity beyond being either her late mother's daughter or her father's stepdaughter. James, entering high school, had more fully integrated me into his understanding of family, seeking my advice on subjects ranging from course selection to investment basics for the small portfolio Daniel had established for his 16th birthday. Daniel's business continued prospering through carefully selected development projects that prioritized quality and community impact over maximum short-term returns. Unlike many developers during the increasingly aggressive 1980s real estate market, he maintained conservative leverage ratios and focused on projects with sustainable value beyond initial profitability. This approach sometimes meant smaller, immediate gains, but created portfolio of properties that maintained value even during market fluctuations. By 1992, Chen Sullivan Financial Advisors had grown to 15 employees, managing over $100 million in client assets. Our integrated approach to traditional investments and selective real estate opportunities had proven particularly valuable during the market volatility following the 1987 crash and subsequent recession. While many conventional advisors struggled to maintain client confidence during this period, our emphasis on diversification and investor education helped clients understand market cycles rather than panic during downturns. It was during this period of professional success that Daniel was diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's disease, a devastating development that would eventually reshape our family and business priorities. Initially, the symptoms were minimal and manageable with medication, but the progressive nature of the condition meant inevitable adjustments to our long-term plans. "We need to accelerate our succession planning," Daniel acknowledged during a difficult conversation shortly after his diagnosis. "Both for my business and for our family's financial security. I've always operated with long-time horizons, but now we need to consider different scenarios." This painful recognition that our future together would include health challenges we hadn't anticipated prompted comprehensive review of our financial and business structures. Daniel began transitioning day-to-day management of his real estate company to his trusted operations director while maintaining strategic oversight. We updated estate documents, established healthcare directives, and created detailed contingency plans for various progression scenarios. Most importantly, we had frank discussions with Elizabeth and James, both now young adults, about the implications of Daniel's condition and the importance of establishing clear expectations and preparations. These conversations weren't merely about financial matters, but about family values and responsibilities during difficult circumstances. Discussions that would prove critically important in ways none of us could anticipate at the time. Throughout the remainder of the 1990s, Daniel's condition progressed more slowly than initially feared, allowing him to maintain meaningful involvement in both business and family activities. Chen Sullivan continued growing steadily, expanding into additional service areas including specialized retirement planning for business owners and executives facing complex transition decisions. By 1998, our firm was managing over $300 million in client assets and had established satellite offices in Cleveland and Columbus, extending our reach beyond Western Pennsylvania. This growth, while gratifying professionally, created increasing demands on my time and energy during a period when Daniel's health needs were also gradually increasing. "You can't effectively serve both the business and me as my condition worsens," Daniel observed with characteristic directness during a weekend when James and his new wife were visiting. "And you shouldn't have to make that choice. We need to consider bringing stronger executive leadership into the firm to relieve some of your operational responsibilities." This conversation initiated careful succession planning for Chen Sullivan, resulting in the recruitment of Michael Harrison, an experienced wealth management executive seeking to relocate from Chicago to Pittsburgh for family reasons. Michael's integration into the firm as Chief Operating Officer allowed me to shift focus toward client relationships and strategic direction while reducing day-to-day management burden. As the millennium turned, several significant transitions reshaped our family landscape. Elizabeth, after completing MBA at Wharton, returned to Pittsburgh with her husband Robert and their infant daughter Catherine. Rather than pursuing expected corporate career path, she expressed interest in learning about her father's real estate business, a development that surprised and delighted Daniel despite his progressive physical limitations. "She has her mother's eye for design and your head for numbers," he observed after Elizabeth's first formal involvement in development project planning meeting. "That's powerful combination for this business." James, meanwhile, had established successful software development company focused on logistics management systems, an enterprise entirely separate from either his father's real estate business or my financial advisory firm. His independence, while sometimes interpreted by Elizabeth as disinterest in family legacy, represented healthy self-determination that both Daniel and I supported. By 2005, Daniel's condition had advanced to the point where professional care assistance became necessary. Rather than institutional arrangements, we modified our home to accommodate his changing needs and engaged experienced healthcare providers who could support his physical requirements while maintaining the dignity and autonomy that remained vitally important to his emotional well-being. During this period, I gradually reduced my active involvement in Chen Sullivan, transitioning to chairperson role that allowed strategic input while passing direct client responsibilities to younger advisors we had developed within the firm. This shift provided more time and energy for Daniel's care while maintaining connection to the business we had built. Elizabeth's involvement in her father's real estate company had evolved from initial learning position to substantive leadership role. Her approach, while respecting Daniel's established principles, introduced contemporary perspectives on sustainability and community integration that enhanced the firm's projects in ways that honored its legacy while adapting to changing market expectations. James and his wife had relocated temporarily to California's emerging tech corridor, where his software company was pursuing strategic partnership with major logistics corporation. While geographically distant, he maintained regular communication through video calls that became increasingly important to Daniel as his mobility decreased. In 2008, Daniel's health took significant downturn, coinciding with the financial crisis that severely impacted markets and real estate values nationwide. The combination of personal and economic challenges created perfect storm that tested all the principles and preparations we had established throughout our relationship. Unlike many real estate operations that collapsed during this period, Daniel's company, now increasingly managed by Elizabeth, weathered the crisis with relative stability due to conservative financing structures and quality-focused portfolio that maintained tenant occupancy even as commercial real estate values plummeted nationally. Similarly, Chen Sullivan navigated the financial turbulence more effectively than many peer firms, partly due to the diversified approach we had always emphasized, and partly through proactive client communication that prevented panic-driven decisions during market low points. The firm emerged from the crisis with enhanced reputation and client loyalty, though not without significant stress and temporary contraction. On personal level, the economic volatility underscored the wisdom of the careful planning Daniel and I had implemented following his diagnosis. Our personal financial resources, conservatively structured and diversified across multiple asset classes, provided security that many in similar circumstances lacked during this challenging period. Daniel passed away in early 2010 after a particularly difficult winter during which his condition deteriorated rapidly. His death, while not unexpected given his progressive illness, nevertheless created profound void in our family system and triggered succession transitions we had planned intellectually but could never be fully prepared for emotionally. The funeral service, held in the community center of one of Daniel's earliest development projects, a mixed-use building that combined affordable senior housing with community facilities, reflected the values that had defined his approach to business and family alike. Rather than traditional religious ceremony, The memorial featured tributes from commercial tenants, residents of his buildings, business associates, and family members, each highlighting different aspects of legacy that transcended physical structures or financial assets. Following Daniel's death, previously established succession plans were implemented across both family and business dimensions. Elizabeth assumed formal leadership of Sullivan Properties, continuing the careful development approach her father had established, while incorporating her own emphasis on sustainable building practices and community integration. Chen Sullivan Financial Advisors, now managed primarily by Michael Harrison with strategic guidance from Teresa and me, continued expanding its regional presence with particular focus on intergenerational wealth transfer planning, service area directly informed by my personal experience navigating complex family transitions. My personal role evolved toward what might be called legacy management, maintaining connections between family branches, preserving institutional knowledge across business entities, and ensuring that the values Daniel and I had cultivated continued informing decisions even as specific applications evolved to address changing circumstances. Elizabeth and her husband, Robert, had 2 more children following Catherine, Daniel Jr., born in 2003, and Sarah in 2006. Their family established home and restored historic property near one of Daniel's signature development projects, maintaining close connection to both the family business and the communities it served. James and his wife Lisa returned from California in 2011, following successful acquisition of his software company by larger technology firm. Rather than continuing in corporate environment, he established technology-focused venture capital fund supporting early-stage Pittsburgh startups, contribution to regional economic development that honored his father's community commitment, while expressing his own distinct professional identity. By 2015, at age 62, I had reached transition point in my own life journey. While maintaining board positions with both Sullivan Properties and Chen Sullivan Financial Advisors, I had effectively transferred operational responsibilities to the next generation of leadership in both organizations. My personal financial security was well established through careful planning and investment throughout my career, providing freedom to consider how I wanted to structure the next phase of my life. After thoughtful consideration, I decided to establish Sullivan Foundation, philanthropic organization focused on economic opportunity and financial literacy for underserved communities in Western Pennsylvania. The foundation's mission directly connected to my origins in Millridge, supporting initiatives that helped individuals and families develop skills and resources for long-term financial stability, rather than merely addressing immediate needs. The Foundation's initial projects included scholarship program for first-generation college students from declining industrial communities, financial education curriculum for high school students, and microfinance initiatives supporting small business development in economically challenged neighborhoods throughout the region. This philanthropic focus represented natural evolution of the principles that had guided my journey from coffee can savings to wealth management. Recognition that financial resources achieved their highest purpose when deployed to create sustainable opportunity rather than merely accumulated or consumed. The foundation structure ensured this work would continue beyond my personal involvement, creating legacy that aligned with values Daniel and I had shared throughout our partnership. As my professional responsibilities decreased, I found myself spending more time with Elizabeth's children, now entering their teenage and preteen years. Catherine, the eldest at 15, showed particular interest in both the family's business history and the foundation's work, often accompanying me to community events and asking thoughtful questions about decision-making principles rather than merely focusing on outcomes or transactions. "Grandma, how did you know which investments would work out?" she asked during one such conversation. "Was it just about the numbers, or was there something else you looked for?" "The numbers always matter," I explained, pleased by her genuine curiosity. "But they tell you about the past and present, not necessarily the future. The most important factors are the underlying principles, understanding what creates sustainable value rather than just temporary profit. That's what your grandfather understood better than most people. These intergenerational conversations, passing forward. Not just information, but wisdom about how to evaluate opportunities and responsibilities, represented the most meaningful aspect of this life phase. While I couldn't know how these lessons would ultimately be applied as Catherine and her siblings developed their own identities and priorities, the transmission itself honored the legacy Daniel and I had built together. What I couldn't anticipate was how these carefully cultivated values would soon be tested in ways that would reveal just how differently Elizabeth and James had integrated the principles we had attempted to model throughout their development, and how these differences would ultimately force decisions I had never imagined making regarding family relationships and resource allocation. The shift in my relationship with Elizabeth began so gradually that, initially, I mistook it for normal evolution in adult family dynamics. In retrospect, the signs were there as early as 2017, when she approached me about reorganizing some of Sullivan Properties' historical investment structures during a quarterly family business review. These older partnerships were designed for tax codes that no longer exist, she explained, spreading documents across the conference table in her office, formerly Daniel's office, though now transformed with her more contemporary aesthetic. They're unnecessarily complicated and create administrative burden that diverts resources from more productive activities. On the surface, her assessment seemed reasonable. Many of the legal structures had indeed been established under different regulatory frameworks, and simplification offered legitimate advantages. Still, something in her presentation triggered a subtle warning signal, a dismissiveness toward arrangements that had been carefully designed with specific purposes beyond mere tax efficiency. These structures weren't created solely for tax purposes, I replied carefully. Your father established them to ensure certain properties remained dedicated to their original community service missions, regardless of market pressures or management changes. The complexity serves protective function, not just administrative one. Elizabeth smiled with the slightly patronizing expression that had become more common in our interactions since Daniel's death. At 49, she had developed confident, executive presence that sometimes bordered on impatience with perspectives different from her own. Dad established these arrangements before modern social impact metrics existed, she countered. We can achieve the same community objectives with updated structures that don't require maintaining 5 separate legal entities for a single property. It's about efficiency, not changing the mission. Rather than engaging in direct confrontation, I suggested comprehensive review process that included both the original documentation and consultation with Richard Brennan, the attorney who had worked with Daniel on establishing the more complex structures. This measured response, seeking additional context rather than either automatic approval or reflexive opposition, represented the balanced approach Daniel and I had always employed when navigating complex decisions with long-term implications. Elizabeth agreed to the review, though with visible reluctance that suggested she had anticipated more immediate endorsement. This subtle tension between her desire for streamlined decision-making and my emphasis on preserving underlying principles would eventually expand beyond specific business matters into broader family dynamics with consequences neither of us could have anticipated at the time. Meanwhile, my relationship with James followed different but equally complex trajectory. After the successful sale of his technology company and subsequent establishment of his venture capital fund, he had positioned himself as forward-thinking financial innovator whose approach implicitly criticized more traditional investment philosophies, including aspects of the approach I had developed throughout my career. The problem with conventional financial planning, he explained during family dinner celebrating his son Michael's 10th birthday in 2018, is that it's built on industrial-era assumptions about economic stability and predictable career trajectories. None of those apply in the digital economy where entire industries can be disrupted overnight. While the observation contained elements of validity, His framing suggested fundamental dismissal of principles that had guided my professional development and family financial decisions for decades. Rather than acknowledging the enduring value of disciplined resource management alongside changing application contexts, he positioned traditional approaches as essentially obsolete, including, by implication, much of what I had tried to teach him. Certain fundamentals remain constant. Regardless of economic structure, I noted in response, spending less than you earn, maintaining reserves for uncertainty, focusing on value creation rather than speculation. These principles apply whether you're dealing with factory employment or digital platforms. James shrugged in the casual manner that had become his characteristic response to perspectives he considered outdated. That's like saying horse riding skills remain relevant in the age of self-driving cars. Technically true, but practically irrelevant to how most people will navigate the future. These seemingly academic disagreements about financial philosophy gradually extended into more personal dimensions as both Elizabeth and James entered their 50s and began confronting their own midlife transitions. Elizabeth's husband, Robert, who had always taken secondary role in family business matters, accepted prestigious position with architectural firm requiring relocation to Chicago in 2019. After extensive family discussion, they decided to maintain dual-city arrangement rather than disrupting their children's established Pittsburgh connections. This geographic separation, while manageable with modern transportation and communication options, nevertheless created additional strains on Elizabeth's already demanding schedule. Increasingly, she viewed traditional family gatherings and decision processes as inefficient demands on limited time rather than essential foundations for maintaining meaningful connections and shared values. James, meanwhile, experienced significant professional setback when two of his fund's largest investments failed simultaneously, creating both financial and reputational challenges that contrasted sharply with his previous trajectory of uninterrupted success. His response, doubling down on higher-risk opportunities rather than re-evaluating fundamental assumptions, reflected concerning departure from the balanced approach to setbacks that Daniel had consistently modeled throughout his business career. These parallel developments in my adult children's lives coincided with my own aging process. While I remained in excellent health for someone approaching 70, natural limitations in energy and recovery capacity led me to further streamline my professional activities, resigning from most board positions except those directly related to the Sullivan Foundation and maintaining only quarterly advisory involvement with Chen Sullivan Financial. This reduced professional engagement allowed more time for personal interests I had postponed throughout my career, particularly extended travel to regions I had studied economically but never experienced personally. Between 2018 and early 2020, I spent several months exploring Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, and South America, combining cultural immersion with visits to microfinance and community development initiatives similar to those supported by our foundation. These experiences, witnessing how universal financial principles manifested differently across diverse cultural and economic contexts, reinforced my conviction that while application methodologies might evolve, fundamental principles of responsible resource management transcended specific technological or regulatory environments. The most successful community development programs, regardless of location, emphasized self-determination, incremental progress, and long-term sustainability, rather than external dependency or quick transformation. My return from Peru in February 2020 coincided with early awareness of the emerging COVID-19 pandemic, which would shortly transform global social and economic patterns in ways none of us could have anticipated. As international travel halted and communities worldwide implemented varying degrees of lockdown, the Sullivan family, like countless others, adapted to dramatically changed circumstances that would ultimately accelerate underlying tensions while introducing entirely new challenges. The pandemic's immediate impact varied significantly across family branches. Elizabeth's real estate operations faced substantial challenges as commercial tenants struggled with sudden revenue declines, and Residential properties required extensive modifications to address health concerns. James's venture fund, conversely, benefited from accelerated digital transformation across multiple sectors, with several portfolio companies experiencing dramatic growth, addressing remote work and service delivery needs. My personal circumstances, while physically restricted like everyone else's, remained relatively stable due to careful preparation and substantial resources. My Pittsburgh condominium, selected years earlier for accessibility and self-contained amenities, proved well-suited to lockdown conditions. Financial arrangements established throughout my career ensured complete security regardless of market turbulence or extended service disruptions. Most significantly, my lifelong emphasis on self-sufficiency and emergency preparation meant I had systems in place for everything from medication management to household supply maintenance that allowed completely independent living despite being in the highest risk age category for COVID complications. While many of my contemporaries struggled with sudden dependency on family members or service providers during lockdown, I maintained normal functioning with minimal external assistance. This visible self-sufficiency during crisis period had unintended consequence of creating false impression among family members that my aging process required no accommodation or forward planning. Because I managed pandemic restrictions independently while many younger people struggled with basic adaptations, both Elizabeth and James seemed to develop assumption that I would similarly navigate future aging challenges without significant family involvement or support. As 2020 progressed into 2021 with continuing pandemic disruptions, subtle but important shifts occurred in both my adult children's circumstances. Elizabeth's real estate company, after initial pandemic challenges, identified substantial opportunity in commercial property reconfiguration as businesses permanently modified workspace requirements. This unexpected growth area required significant capital investment at precisely the moment traditional financing had become more conservative, creating pressure to identify alternative funding sources for time-sensitive opportunities. James, meanwhile, experienced second significant setback when promised follow-on funding for his venture capital operations was withdrawn by major institutional investor concerned about portfolio concentration in certain technology sectors. This financing gap threatened both existing investments and the fund's ability to participate in promising new opportunities his team had identified, placing substantial pressure on family resources he had previously kept separate from his professional activities. These parallel challenges, both children, facing unexpected capital requirements for different reasons, emerged against backdrop of my 75th birthday in late 2021, which naturally prompted broader family discussions about estate planning, wealth transfer strategies, and long-term health considerations. What should have been thoughtful, values-based conversation about multidimensional legacy preservation instead became increasingly focused on immediate financial logistics and access to resources currently under my direct control. The pivotal conversation occurred during Thanksgiving weekend 2021, our first full family gathering since pandemic restrictions had eased. Elizabeth's family had traveled from Chicago. James and his family had returned from their vacation home in Colorado, and Catherine, now a poised young woman of 21, had flown in from her junior year at Columbia University. The multi-generational assembly, gathered in the dining room of my condominium, initially maintained festive atmosphere despite underlying tensions. After dinner, as younger family members dispersed to various entertainment options throughout the building, Elizabeth initiated what began as typical business discussion, but quickly revealed deeper agenda. We should discuss streamlining the family trust structures, she began with practiced casualness. Given the tax law changes coming next year and your milestone birthday, it's a natural time to implement more efficient arrangements for eventual asset transfers. James, normally positioned as Elizabeth's counterpoint in family discussions, surprisingly aligned with her perspective. The current structures were designed for different market conditions and regulatory frameworks, he added. They're unnecessarily complex given contemporary options for achieving the same objectives with fewer administrative layers. The coordinated presentation suggested prior discussion between them, unusual given their typically divergent approaches to financial matters, and immediately signaled that something more consequential than routine estate planning was being proposed. Rather than responding directly, I asked neutral question designed to reveal underlying motivations. What specific inefficiencies concern you most in the current arrangements? The momentary glance exchanged between Elizabeth and James confirmed my suspicion that their apparent concern about administrative efficiency masked more immediate objectives. After brief hesitation, Elizabeth adopted the direct approach that characterized her business negotiations. To be frank, both James and I are facing time-sensitive investment opportunities that align perfectly with the family's long-term interests. The current trust structures make it unnecessarily complicated to access capital that will ultimately transfer to the next generation anyway. We're suggesting acceleration rather than fundamental change. Acceleration with appropriate protections. And returns, James added quickly. This isn't about depleting resources, but deploying them more effectively during your lifetime, so you can see the positive impacts rather than leaving everything to post-estate implementation. The framing was skillful, positioning their proposal as beneficial to me rather than primarily serving their immediate needs. Yet beneath the careful language lay concerning assumptions about both my decision-making capacity and the fundamental purpose of the resources Daniel and I had accumulated throughout our lives. I appreciate your thinking about efficient resource deployment, I responded after measured consideration. That's always been central to our family's approach. However, efficiency isn't our only or even primary objective. The structures Daniel and I established reflect specific intentions about how resources should function across generations, not just technical tax considerations. Elizabeth's expression tightened slightly, the subtle change visible primarily because I had watched her face transition from childhood openness through adolescent guardedness to adult self-control over decades of family dynamics. With respect, she said in tone that suggested limited actual deference, Dad established these structures when we were children without established track records. Both James and I have demonstrated capability to manage significant resources responsibly. The restrictions made sense 30 years ago, but create artificial limitations now. James nodded in rare agreement with his sister. The opportunity cost of maintaining these segregated pools of capital is substantial. We're not suggesting eliminating thoughtful management, just updating the approach to reflect current realities and capabilities. Something in their coordinated presentation triggered memory of conversation with Daniel during early stage of his illness, when we had been discussing how to structure resources to maintain both family support and key values after his death. Money reveals character rather than building it, he had observed while reviewing draft trust documents. The best protections aren't legal barriers, but values transmitted before resources transfer. Still, structural safeguards provide valuable reflection time when impulses might override principles. That wisdom, recognizing both the primacy of character development and the practical value of structural protections, had guided our estate planning throughout Daniel's illness progression. The current conversation suggested both Elizabeth and James viewed those carefully considered arrangements primarily as outdated restrictions rather than purposeful frameworks designed to preserve specific values and priorities. The structures aren't arbitrary complications, I explained, maintaining calm tone despite growing concern about their perspective. They represent deliberate balancing of family support, community responsibility, and intergenerational stewardship. Efficiency is one consideration among many, not the primary objective. The remainder of that evening maintained outward politeness while revealing fundamental disconnection between my understanding of wealth purpose and my children's increasingly transactional perspective. Though specific financial requests were temporarily set aside, the underlying tension remained unresolved as family members departed the following day. Over the next several months, parallel campaigns developed as both Elizabeth and James pursued different strategies toward essentially similar objective, gaining greater control over family resources currently under my management. Elizabeth focused on legal and structural approaches, regularly sending articles about modern estate planning strategies, and introducing me to financial advisors specializing in simplified family wealth transfer. James emphasized emotional and relationship dimensions, increasing the frequency of family visits while regularly discussing exciting investment opportunities that unfortunately exceeded his current capital access. These continued efforts, while concerning, remained within bounds of normal family financial discussions until March 2022, when I experienced a brief but frightening health episode that temporarily shifted family dynamics in a significant way. While exercising in my condominium building's fitness center, I became dizzy and momentarily lost consciousness, falling against a weight machine and sustaining minor facial lacerations along with shoulder bruising. The incident itself was relatively minor, later diagnosed as vasovagal syncope triggered by dehydration and overexertion rather than serious cardiac or neurological condition. However, the visible injuries and emergency room visit catalyzed dramatic shift in both Elizabeth's and James's approach to my living situation and financial autonomy. This demonstrates exactly what we've been concerned about, Elizabeth declared, during impromptu family meeting in my hospital room, despite my protests that the incident didn't warrant such dramatic response. You're living alone without proper monitoring or assistance. It's simply not sustainable at your age. James, again, showing unusual alignment with his sister's position, immediately supported her assessment. We've been researching excellent senior living options that provide appropriate care while maintaining independence. Several have openings currently, but they require prompt decision-making. The coordinated presentation, complete with brochures, for 3 continuing care communities they had apparently pre-selected, revealed concerning level of planning that had preceded my minor health incident. Rather than viewing the episode as isolated occurrence warranting proportional response, they were leveraging it to implement significant lifestyle change that aligned with their broader objective of restructuring family financial arrangements. Appreciate your concern, I responded carefully, conscious of the doctor who had entered during their presentation and was observing the family dynamics with professional neutrality. But this was a simple fainting episode caused by forgetting to drink water during my workout, not indication of inability to live independently. Let's discuss this after I've been discharged and can consider options without unnecessary urgency. Dr. Patel, the attending physician who had completed her examination during this exchange, provided welcome clinical perspective. Mrs. Sullivan is absolutely correct about the nature of this episode. Her tests show excellent overall health for someone of any age, and there's no medical justification for significant lifestyle modification based on this incident. I'd recommend standard hydration protocols during exercise and possibly a home medical alert system as reasonable precautions, nothing more extensive. This professional assessment temporarily moderated Elizabeth and James's more dramatic proposals, though their concerned expressions suggested the reprieve would be temporary. After being discharged with clean bill of health, I returned to my condominium with heightened awareness that my continued independence would require proactive measures beyond simply maintaining physical well-being. The following week, I contacted Miranda Chen, daughter of my longtime business partner Teresa, and now managing partner at the law firm, where she specialized in elder law and estate planning. Our relationship combined professional expertise with personal history. Miranda had known me since childhood and understood both my values and family dynamics from multiple perspectives. I need comprehensive review of my current arrangements, I explained during our initial consultation. Recent interactions suggest I should anticipate potential challenges to my autonomy as I age, despite being fully capable currently. Miranda, whose professional experience with elder financial exploitation had made her simultaneously compassionate and pragmatic, didn't require elaborate explanation to understand the situation. Unfortunately, this pattern is common even in families with no previous history of concerning behavior, she noted. Adult children facing their own financial pressures or midlife transitions often reframe parental aging as opportunity to help in ways that coincidentally address their own needs. The approach frequently accelerates after health incidents, however minor. Over the following month, Miranda conducted thorough review of my estate documents, financial structures, and healthcare directives. While the fundamental planning remained sound, she identified several areas where additional protections could prevent future complications without disrupting legitimate family relationships or eventual wealth transfer plans. Your advance directives and powers of attorney need updating with more specific capacity determination protocols, she advised during our review meeting. The current documents use standard language that could allow premature intervention based on subjective assessments rather than objective medical and cognitive evaluation. More significantly, Miranda recommended establishing additional independent oversight mechanisms for key financial decisions should questions about my capacity arise in the future. Rather than relying exclusively on family members whose financial interests might conflict with mine, the revised structures incorporated trusted non-family professionals with specific fiduciary responsibilities to maintain my established priorities and values. These modifications don't change your ultimate intentions, she explained as we reviewed the draft documents. They simply ensure those intentions remain controlling even if circumstances create pressure for deviation. The legal updates, while providing essential protection, addressed only one dimension of the complex situation developing within my family system. The deeper concern involved understanding what had shifted in Elizabeth and James's perspectives to create such misalignment with the values Daniel and I had attempted to model throughout their development. This question led me to unusual, but illuminating conversation with Dr. Elaine Morgan, psychologist who had become friend through our shared involvement with women's leadership initiatives supported by the Sullivan Foundation. Over lunch in her office, arrangement that maintained appropriate confidentiality without formality of therapeutic relationship, I described the evolving family dynamics with specific focus on the disconnect between long-standing values and current behaviors. What you're describing isn't uncommon during this life stage, Dr. Morgan observed after listening carefully. Your children are simultaneously facing their own aging process, retrospective evaluation of their life choices, and prospective concerns about both their children's futures and their own retirement security. These multiple pressures can transform even well-established values when combined with opportunity to address immediate concerns through access to substantial resources. Her analysis helped me recognize that my children's behavior, while concerning, wasn't necessarily indication of fundamental character deficiency or rejection of everything Daniel and I had taught them. Rather, it reflected natural human vulnerability to rationalization when immediate desires intersect with plausible justifications, precisely the tendency Daniel and I had acknowledged when establishing structural protections within our estate. Planning. This understanding, compassionate without being naive, informed my approach to subsequent family interactions throughout spring and summer of 2022. Rather than direct confrontation about concerning behaviors or defensive withdrawal from meaningful relationship, I maintained engaged but boundaried connection, neither capitulating to inappropriate pressure nor attributing malicious intent to actions that likely reflected complex combination of genuine concern and self-interest. The situation might have continued in this tenuous equilibrium indefinitely had external circumstances not intervened to accelerate underlying tensions into direct conflict. In September 2022, Major Real Estate Investment Trust announced aggressive acquisition strategy targeting exactly the type of mixed-use properties that formed core of Sullivan Properties' portfolio. The potential opportunity represented transformative transaction for Elizabeth's company, but required capital resources beyond what traditional financing would support in increasingly restrictive lending environment. Simultaneously, one of James's most promising portfolio companies received acquisition offer from Major Technology Corporation, opportunity requiring immediate response but complicated by his fund's inability to finance bridge transaction that would maximize shareholder returns while maintaining key management team's ongoing involvement. These parallel situations, emerging within weeks of each other, created perfect storm of financial pressure, precisely when my enhanced legal protections had reduced their ability to influence asset deployment through conventional family persuasion. The frustration this structural limitation generated, especially given the legitimately promising nature of both opportunities, apparently motivated dramatic escalation in their approach to my living situation and financial autonomy. The strategy became clear during seemingly routine Sunday dinner at Elizabeth's Pittsburgh home in late October. The gathering included both immediate family and several guests, who were introduced casually, but whose professional roles became evident as conversation progressed: geriatric care specialist, senior living community representative, and financial advisor specializing in late-life transitions. As dinner concluded, Elizabeth smoothly guided conversation toward presentation, clearly designed to overwhelm through combination of emotional appeals, selective expert testimony, and implied consensus among everyone except me. "We've been increasingly concerned about your living situation," she began with practiced sincerity. "The episode last spring demonstrated the risks of your current arrangement, and we've consulted with specialists who confirm our concerns are well-founded." On cue, the geriatric care specialist, Dr. Lewis, offered carefully constructed assessment emphasizing general statistical risks of independent living after 75, rather than any specific evaluation of my particular circumstances or capabilities. His presentation seamlessly transitioned to enthusiastic overview of Mountain View senior community by their representative, Ms. Peterson, who highlighted luxury amenities and comprehensive services with particular emphasis on their memory care facilities, feature entirely irrelevant to my current cognitive status, but subtly implying potential future necessity. Throughout this orchestrated presentation, James maintained supportive background presence, occasionally interjecting personal observations about other seniors who had resisted transition only to experience preventable crises that created burden on their loved ones. The emotional leverage was skillfully applied, positioning their proposal as protecting me rather than controlling my resources, though the financial implications remained conspicuously unaddressed in the formal presentation. When the initial overview concluded with expectant pauses suggesting immediate decision was anticipated, I responded with calm question that temporarily disrupted their momentum. "This presentation seems thoroughly prepared. How long have you been developing this specific plan?" The momentary glances exchanged among the participants confirmed what I had suspected. This wasn't spontaneous expression of concern, but carefully orchestrated intervention designed to overcome anticipated resistance through overwhelming social pressure and emotional manipulation. Elizabeth recovered quickly. "We've been researching options since your incident in March. Mountain View currently has rare opening in their executive apartment section, but it requires commitment within the next 2 weeks. We've already handled preliminary application to secure the opportunity pending your approval." The presumptiveness of having submitted application without any prior discussion represented concerning escalation from previous persuasion attempts. More troubling was the coincidental timing that aligned perfectly with their immediate financial needs that would be substantially addressed if I transitioned to continuing care community that typically required significant entrance fee alongside liquidation of existing residents. Rather than direct confrontation that would likely escalate tensions unproductively, I responded with measured appreciation for their apparent concern while establishing clear boundaries regarding decision timeline. "Thank you for researching these options. I'll need to review the materials independently and consult with my own advisors before making any decisions about significant lifestyle changes. I'll plan to discuss this further after I've had appropriate time for proper consideration." This reasonable response, neither rejecting their input entirely nor capitulating to inappropriate pressure, visibly frustrated Elizabeth, whose expression momentarily revealed the agenda beneath her expressed concern. The available unit won't. Remain open indefinitely, she noted with barely concealed impatience. These opportunities are increasingly rare given demographic trends. Delaying decision likely means missing this particular opening. Then perhaps it isn't the right opportunity, I replied pleasantly but firmly. Major life decisions deserve thorough evaluation regardless of artificial time pressures. I'll consider the information you've provided along with other options. My own advisors might suggest. The remainder of the evening maintained surface civility while underlying tension remained palpable. As I prepared to leave, James approached with uncharacteristic directness about the financial dimensions previously left unaddressed in formal presentation. The Mountain View arrangement would significantly simplify your overall situation, he suggested with attempted casualness. The entrance fee would come from condominium proceeds, and the monthly service charges would be structured to utilize retirement assets more efficiently than your current arrangements. We could handle all the transitions seamlessly with proper authorization. The financial efficiency framing, presenting what would be substantial liquidation and restructuring as mere administrative streamlining, revealed concerning perspective on resources I had carefully managed for decades. Rather than engaging directly with this problematic characterization, I simply thanked him for the information and reiterated my intention to evaluate options independently. What I couldn't have anticipated was how dramatically Elizabeth and James would escalate their approach following this initial resistance to their coordinated plan. The weeks following that Sunday dinner would reveal depths of determination I had never imagined my children capable of, ultimately forcing decisions about family relationships and resource allocation that would transform our family system in ways none of us could fully predict. The escalation began with subtle changes in how my children communicated with me. After the failed intervention dinner, direct pressure about Mountain View senior community temporarily subsided, replaced by concerning pattern of exclusion from normal family information flow and decision processes. Thanksgiving plans were discussed without consulting my preferences. Christmas arrangements were communicated as established facts rather than collaborative decisions. Even routine family matters increasingly proceeded without my input or awareness until after determinations had been finalized. This deliberate marginalization, treating me as passenger rather than driver in family life, appeared designed to reinforce narrative of diminished capacity despite abundant evidence to the contrary. Simultaneously, I noticed increased communication between Elizabeth and James, whose historically competitive relationship had transformed into concerning alliance focused on helping manage my affairs despite no actual need for such assistance. In early December, these concerning patterns accelerated when I received unusual call from Dr. Peterson, my longtime physician whom I typically saw for biannual checkups but had no scheduled appointments with until February. The office manager mentioned your children called with concerns about cognitive changes they've noticed. He began awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. They've requested comprehensive evaluation, including cognitive assessment, during your upcoming physical. This unexpected development, manufacturing concerns about cognitive function never previously mentioned directly to me, represented disturbing escalation from earlier tactics focused on physical safety following my minor fainting episode. The strategy appeared designed to establish documentation that might later support legal intervention regardless of actual impairment, creating paper trail for potential guardianship proceedings if other approaches proved unsuccessful. That's interesting, I responded calmly despite internal alarm. Neither Elizabeth nor James has expressed any specific concerns to me directly. Could you share what observations they reported to your office? Dr. Peterson's hesitation spoke volumes about the nature of their communication. The concerns were rather general, occasional forgetfulness, resistance to reasonable suggestions about living arrangements, unusual financial decisions. Nothing that wouldn't be typical for any adult regardless of age, frankly. His characterization confirmed my suspicion that they were attempting to pathologize normal boundary maintenance as cognitive decline, particularly concerning given my recent firm position on maintaining financial independence. Rather than defensive reaction that might inadvertently reinforce their narrative, I responded with calm transparency that established my clear cognitive functioning. "I'm perfectly willing to complete any assessments you recommend," I assured him. In fact, given these apparently undiscussed concerns, I'd prefer comprehensive evaluation by independent specialist with geriatric expertise rather than standard screening. I'd like documentation from qualified expert confirming my decision-making. Capacity remains intact. This proactive approach, seeking thorough assessment rather than resisting evaluation, apparently surprised my physician, who had likely anticipated defensive response that would itself be interpreted as concerning. My willingness to pursue comprehensive testing by specialists represented confident transparency incompatible with someone experiencing cognitive decline or lacking insight into their condition. "That seems entirely reasonable," he agreed, professional demeanor relaxing slightly. "I can refer you to Dr. Lakshmi Rao at University Cognitive Assessment Center. She's the leading geriatric neuropsychologist in the region, and completely independent from your family's various business interests." This reference to potential conflicts of interest suggested Dr. Peterson had recognized concerning dimensions in my children's approach that extended beyond normal family concern. His recommendation of specifically independent specialist indicated professional awareness that objective assessment untainted by financial considerations was essential given the circumstances. The evaluation with Dr. Rao, conducted over several sessions in mid-December, included comprehensive cognitive testing, functional capacity assessment, and thorough evaluation of both daily living skills and complex decision-making abilities. The process was rigorous but reassuring, confirming what I already knew. My cognitive functioning remained excellent across all domains, with particular strengths in financial reasoning, planning capability, and judgment regarding risk assessment. "Your performance exceeds norms for your age group in every category we assessed," Dr. Rao explained during our final consultation. "In fact, your scores in several domains exceed average performance for individuals decades younger. There is absolutely no clinical evidence supporting concerns about decision-making capacity or need for assistance with financial or personal affairs." Her formal report, which I requested be sent directly to my attorney Miranda Chen as well as to Dr. Peterson, provided crucial documentation establishing my continued capacity at precisely the moment my children were attempting to suggest otherwise. This proactive measure would prove invaluable given what occurred next. The holiday season temporarily paused the most overt pressure as extended family gatherings created social contexts where obvious manipulation would be visible to others. Christmas at Elizabeth's home maintained outward normalcy, though I noticed subtle patterns in how information was controlled and conversations directed whenever my living situation or financial matters arose tangentially. Most concerning was private conversation with Catherine, now 22, who approached me with genuine confusion while others were occupied with gift exchanges in another room. "Grandma, is it true you're having trouble remembering things?" she asked with characteristic directness. "Mom mentioned you've been struggling lately and might need different living arrangements soon. She asked us not to mention health issues during the holidays to avoid upsetting you." This deliberate misinformation, creating false narrative about my condition among extended family while instructing them to maintain silence about these supposed concerns, represented disturbing escalation beyond previous tactics. Rather than burdening Catherine with complex family conflict, I responded with simple transparency that addressed her immediate concern without creating loyalty conflicts. "I actually completed comprehensive cognitive assessment with specialist earlier this month," I explained gently. "The results showed my cognitive functioning remains excellent across all domains. There are some disagreements about future planning, but they're about preferences and values, not about my capacity to make decisions." Catherine's relief was immediately visible. though confusion about the contradiction between her mother's claims, and my evident functioning remained unresolved. This interaction reinforced my determination to address the situation definitively before false narratives became entrenched throughout the extended family system. The pivotal event occurred in mid-January, when I returned from week-long foundation-related trip to Washington, D.C., to find certified letter from attorney representing both Elizabeth and James. The document, couched in formally polite language, proposed voluntary guardianship arrangement that would transfer decision-making authority for both financial and healthcare matters to my children, while allowing me to maintain dignity and independence within appropriate supportive environment. Despite careful wording attempting to present the arrangement as collaborative rather than coercive, the underlying threat was unmistakable. Either accept voluntary limitations on autonomy or face potentially contentious legal proceedings seeking court-imposed guardianship. The proposal included moving to Mountain View within 30 days and liquidating my condominium to pay the substantial entrance fee, with remaining proceeds transferred to Family Management Trust, controlled by Elizabeth and James as co-trustees. Most disturbing was document's complete disregard for the comprehensive cognitive assessment completed barely a month earlier, which had definitively established my capacity to manage my own affairs. This willful ignorance of objective medical evidence confirmed that their concerns about my functioning were pretextual rather than genuine, strategic leverage for financial objectives rather than authentic response to actual limitations. After reviewing the letter with appropriate seriousness, I contacted Miranda Chen to discuss response options. Her assessment was both professionally measured and personally outraged on my behalf. This is remarkably aggressive given the recent specialist evaluation documenting your capacity, she observed, after reviewing both the letter and Dr. Rao's report. No court would grant guardianship based on the current evidence. However, defending against even meritless proceedings can become exhausting and emotionally damaging for all involved. Miranda's observation highlighted the troubling leverage even unfounded guardianship threats created. The process itself could become sufficiently stressful and disruptive that many seniors accepted inappropriate limitations simply to avoid protracted legal battles, regardless of the ultimate likelihood of success. This reality informed my approach to the situation, focusing on resolving the underlying issues rather than merely defending against specific tactical maneuvers. After careful consideration, I scheduled meeting with Elizabeth and James at Miranda's office, rather than responding directly to their attorney. This approach, addressing them personally while maintaining professional legal context, represented attempt to preserve potential relationship repair while establishing clear boundaries regarding unacceptable behavior. The meeting, conducted in Miranda's conference room on particularly cold January morning, began with palpable tension, as both Elizabeth and James realized they would be addressing me directly, rather than proceeding through legal proxies as they had apparently anticipated. Their matching expressions of surprise when I entered with Dr. Rao's comprehensive capacity assessment report and supporting documentation suggested they had not expected such thorough counter-preparation. "I've reviewed your proposal and supporting documents," I began calmly after preliminary greetings had established professional rather than emotionally reactive tone. "I understand you have concerns about my living situation and financial management. However, as this recent comprehensive assessment confirms, there is no clinical or functional basis for the guardianship arrangement you've proposed." Elizabeth attempted to redirect toward emotional rather than factual considerations. "This isn't about legal documents or clinical assessments," she insisted with practiced sincerity that might have been convincing to someone who hadn't witnessed the progressive manipulation leading to this moment. "It's about making appropriate arrangements before a crisis occurs. We're trying to help you transition gracefully rather than responding to emergency. Appropriate arrangements for significant life transitions should reflect the individual's own values and preferences," I responded evenly. The specific arrangements you've proposed align primarily with your current financial needs, rather than my established priorities or actual functional requirements. This direct identification of their underlying financial motivations, naming the unstated agenda driving their ostensible concern, visibly unsettled both of them. James attempted recovery by pivoting toward business efficiency arguments that had previously characterized his approach. The current structures are unnecessarily complicated given changing family circumstances, he offered, avoiding direct engagement with the guardianship issue. We're suggesting streamlined arrangement that accomplishes same objectives with reduced administrative overhead. The structure's complexity serves protective functions that recent events have demonstrated remain necessary, I countered, maintaining focus on substantive issues rather than allowing diversion toward technical details. The fundamental question isn't administrative efficiency, but whose priorities should control resources I've managed successfully for decades. This framing, directly addressing control issues rather than allowing continued pretense of administrative optimization, momentarily silenced both of them. Miranda used this opening to introduce alternative approach that might address legitimate family considerations while maintaining appropriate boundaries. Mrs. Sullivan has prepared comprehensive capacity plan that addresses genuine aging-related concerns without inappropriate limitations on her autonomy, she explained, distributing documents we had prepared. This includes enhanced communication protocols for health events, designated consultation processes for significant financial decisions, and structured family input mechanisms that respect both her continued independence and valuable perspectives family members can offer. The proposal represented good faith attempt to address any legitimate concerns while firmly rejecting inappropriate control efforts. During extended discussion that followed, specific provisions were reviewed in detail, with particular attention to mechanisms that would provide family members appropriate information without transferring decision authority prematurely or unnecessarily. Throughout this process, I maintained balanced perspective that neither vilified my children nor capitulated to inappropriate demands. Their concerns, while packaged in manipulative approach, contained elements of legitimate consideration regarding aging parents' changing circumstances. The challenge was separating genuine family care from opportunistic control attempts, distinction that required nuanced rather than binary response. After nearly 3 hours of detailed discussion, tentative agreement emerged around modified plan that preserved my autonomy while establishing more structured communication protocols for health and financial matters. While neither Elizabeth nor James appeared fully satisfied with outcome that maintained my independent decision-making authority, the alternative, potentially contentious legal proceedings with minimal chance of success given recent capacity documentation, apparently seemed sufficiently unappealing to motivate superficial cooperation. As meeting concluded with arrangements for formal document preparation, I harbored no illusions that the underlying issues had been fully resolved. The fundamental misalignment between my carefully established values and their increasingly transaction-focused approach to family resources remained unaddressed, merely redirected from overt control attempt toward more subtle influence strategies, likely to emerge in different forms. This realistic assessment, neither naively trusting nor cynically dismissive, guided my subsequent actions during apparent detente that followed our January meeting. While maintaining normal family interactions and honoring commitments established in our agreement, I simultaneously implemented confidential contingency planning that would protect my autonomy should more aggressive measures eventually resurface. Most significant element of this contingency planning involved property adjacent to Mountain View senior community that had become available through connection established during my foundation work. The Harrington Estate, magnificent historic mansion on 15 landscaped acres directly neighboring Mountain View's northern boundary, had been donated to Regional Preservation Trust by elderly owner with no direct heirs, with arrangement allowing continuation of private residence usage provided property's architectural integrity was maintained. As Foundation Board member with particular expertise in historic preservation financing, I had helped structure innovative arrangement, allowing trusts to maintain property ownership, while permitting qualified private resident to occupy main house under long-term lease that included responsibility for maintenance and preservation. The specific requirements, financial capacity, preservation commitment, and willingness to periodically open portions of the property for educational programs, severely limited potential occupant pool, creating unusual opportunity I was uniquely positioned to access. When the previous resident vacated the property unexpectedly in February, the Trust's executive director contacted me regarding potential temporary occupancy while permanent arrangement was developed. What began as short-term solution addressing Trust's immediate needs evolved into comprehensive proposal, incorporating my foundation resources, personal financial capacity, and professional preservation expertise in arrangement, providing stable property stewardship while simultaneously creating residential option perfectly aligned with my personal needs and preferences. The resulting agreement, finalized in early March without public announcement given the property's significance and privacy considerations, established my right to occupy the extensively renovated main residence and adjacent carriage house while supporting Trust's preservation mission through both substantial financial commitment and professional expertise. The arrangement, while completely legitimate and transparent between directly involved parties, remained confidential from general public, including my children, as matter of standard privacy protocols for high-value historic properties. This contingency planning, establishing residential alternative that maintained independence, privacy, and connection to meaningful work, while requiring no external approval or support, provided essential security during period when superficial cooperation masked unresolved control issues within family system. While I genuinely hoped our January agreement would establish sustainable relationship patterns respecting appropriate boundaries, the Harrington arrangement ensured I wouldn't face restricted options should subsequent control attempts emerge. Throughout February and March, Elizabeth and James maintained apparent adherence to our agreement's communication protocols while subtly testing boundaries through increasingly frequent suggestions about financial matters presented as helpful information, rather than explicit demands. These suggestions, invariably aligned with their individual business interests, typically referenced simplification and efficiency rather than acknowledging the substantive priority shifts they actually represented. I responded to these approaches with consistent pattern, thoughtful consideration of legitimate business elements while maintaining firm boundaries regarding decision authority and fundamental priorities. This balanced approach neither rejected potentially valuable insights nor capitulated to inappropriate influence attempts, maintaining relationship possibilities while protecting essential autonomy. By early April, however, subtle indications suggested renewed coordination between Elizabeth and James toward more aggressive approach, despite our formal agreement. Brief comments during family gatherings increasingly referenced my age and theoretical vulnerability in ways that established narrative groundwork for potential capacity challenges. Administrative assistance, offered for routine matters gradually, expanded toward decision domains explicitly reserved under our agreement. Most concerning were private conversations with healthcare providers reported by my primary physician, indicating renewed attempts to establish documentation of functional limitations despite contrary objective evidence. These warning signs, recognized through pattern awareness rather than any single dramatic incident, informed my practical preparations even while maintaining hope for relationship repair. Without obvious confrontation that might accelerate conflict unnecessarily, I quietly ensured the Harrington property was fully prepared for immediate occupancy, completed comprehensive documentation of my continuing cognitive functioning with independent specialists, and updated financial arrangements to prevent unauthorized access or transactions regardless of potential future capacity challenges. The decisive escalation occurred with shocking suddenness in late April, following routine outpatient procedure to remove small basal cell carcinoma from my shoulder. Minor dermatological intervention requiring local anesthesia but no significant recovery limitations. Elizabeth had offered to drive me to the appointment, seemingly thoughtful gesture that I accepted, despite having arranged alternative transportation as precaution given recent concerning patterns. Upon procedure completion, rather than returning to my condominium as planned, Elizabeth informed me we needed to briefly stop by Mountain View Senior Community to discuss potential future options. Despite my clear statement that I preferred returning home directly, she insisted the appointment was pre-arranged and would require only 15 minutes, presenting the deviation as minor convenience rather than significant itinerary change. Upon arrival at Mountain View, we were immediately greeted by administrator who had participated in the original intervention dinner months earlier, along with facility physician I had never met nor authorized to review my medical information. The orchestrated nature of the encounter became immediately apparent as I was escorted to private office, where James was already waiting alongside individual introduced as transition specialist, responsible for facilitating emergency admissions. The BI arranged tableau, complete with admission paperwork prepared in advance and suitcase of clothing items apparently packed from my condominium without permission, revealed elaborate preparation inconsistent with spontaneous response to legitimate emergency. Most concerning was my shoulder bandage being immediately referenced as evidence of recent fall requiring medical intervention, despite being entirely unrelated dermatological procedure with comprehensive documentation in my medical record. Before I could address these misrepresentations, Elizabeth presented document she claimed was capacity assessment authorization, requiring signature for routine evaluation during transitional admission. Closer examination revealed the form actually constituted consent for 30-day evaluation stay, with automatic conversion to permanent residence, unless specific discontinuation was documented by attending physician who was simultaneously being introduced as my new primary care provider, despite no prior relationship or formal transfer of medical management. This is completely inappropriate, I stated firmly, refusing offered pen while maintaining composed demeanor despite the outrageous circumstances. I have not authorized admission to this facility, temporary or otherwise. I am returning to my home immediately. James adopted concerned expression clearly rehearsed for this scenario. Mom, we understand this feels sudden, but Dr. Richards believes short observation period is medically indicated given your recent incidents. The evaluation period is just precautionary while determining appropriate long-term arrangements. This deliberate mischaracterization, transforming routine dermatological procedure into justification for institutional placement, represented disturbing escalation beyond previous manipulation attempts, rather than emotional response that might be interpreted as confusion or agitation. I maintained calm focus on procedural violations that would establish clear record of inappropriate conduct. I have not authorized Dr. Richards as my physician, have no established care relationship with him, and have not consented to medical evaluation by facility staff, I stated for benefit of administrator who appeared increasingly uncomfortable with unfolding situation. My current primary physician is Dr. Peterson, who has complete records regarding today's minor dermatological procedure. I am leaving now and will arrange my own transportation if necessary. Elizabeth's response revealed contingency planning that indicated concerning level of predetermined intent. We've already discussed transition with Dr. Peterson, who agrees short-term placement is appropriate given recent concerns. Your condominium building has been notified you'll be temporarily relocated, and necessary items have already been brought. Here for your comfort. This statement, implying coordination with my legitimate physician despite his previous support for my independence, momentarily created doubt about whether they had somehow secured medical authorization I wasn't aware of. The strategic ambiguity, delivered with practiced sincerity in presence of facility staff, positioned as neutral medical authorities, represented sophisticated leveraging of healthcare systems' deference to family members when potential capacity issues arise. Rather than directly challenging factual claims that would create counterproductive credibility contest in an environment where institutional staff typically default toward risk-averse admissions, I shifted toward process requirements that would create documented evidence of appropriate consent standards. As medical facility operating under Medicare guidelines, Mountain View is required to obtain informed consent from patients with decision-making capacity, I noted, addressing administrator directly rather than continuing unproductive exchange with my children. Dr. Rao's comprehensive assessment establishing my capacity is on file with my attorney. Any admission without my direct informed consent would constitute reportable violation of patient rights under federal regulations. This reference to specific regulatory requirements rather than general objections visibly impacted facility staff, who exchanged concerned glances reflecting awareness of potential compliance issues. The administrator, clearly recognizing legal exposure emerging from what had been presented to her as routine family-supported transition, attempted to redirect toward temporary compromise. Perhaps short rest period while family discusses options would be appropriate, she suggested, attempting to create face-saving middle ground that would diffuse immediate confrontation without clearly violating consent requirements. We have comfortable consultation room where refreshments can be provided while transportation arrangements are clarified. Before I could respond to this reasonable-sounding but still inappropriate suggestion, Elizabeth made critical tactical error revealing their ultimate intentions with uncharacteristic transparency. The durable power of attorney gives us authority to make these arrangements, she stated with visible frustration at the procedural roadblocks emerging. We've already filed paperwork transferring healthcare decisions temporarily while capacity assessment is completed. This claim, referencing legal authority I knew had never been granted nor activated, provided crucial opening to definitively establish the situation's actual status. Maintaining composed demeanor that contrasted sharply with her increasing agitation, I addressed the administrator with precise language that would create clear record. The document she's referencing specifically requires written certification from 2 physicians that I lack capacity before any authority transfers, I explained calmly. No such determination exists because I remain fully capable as documented. By recent comprehensive assessment, any facility admission based on unauthorized surrogate consent would constitute reportable regulatory violation. This specific procedural clarification, demonstrating detailed knowledge of both my own legal documents and relevant regulatory requirements, visibly shifted facility staff's perspective on the situation. The administrator, now clearly concerned about institution's potential liability, requested private consultation with facility attorney before proceeding further with admission process. During tense 20 minutes that followed, I remained in consultation room with Elizabeth and James, maintaining calm silence rather than engaging further discussion that might escalate conflict unproductively. Their periodic whispered consultations suggested growing awareness that their carefully orchestrated plan had encountered unexpected obstacles they hadn't prepared contingencies for. When the administrator returned with facility counsel, her changed demeanor immediately signaled significant reassessment of the situation. After reviewing relevant documentation, we cannot proceed with admission without clear consent or valid surrogate authorization, she stated formally. Mountain View cannot accept placement under current circumstances without risking significant regulatory compliance issues. This professional determination, prioritizing legitimate consent standards over family members' preferences, regardless of their apparent authority or sincerity, created definitive procedural barrier to their immediate objective. The facility, attorneys' supporting presence established institutional rather than merely individual assessment, preventing dismissal as single administrator's excessive caution. Elizabeth attempted final leverage through practical circumstances rather than procedural authority. We've already addressed your condominium status and transported essential belongings here, she noted with strained patience. Returning there isn't practical immediate option regardless of long-term arrangements. This statement, confirming they had taken unauthorized actions regarding my residence before securing any legitimate placement authorization, revealed concerning level of presumption incompatible with respect for basic autonomy. Rather than directly challenging this implicit threat of manufactured homelessness, I simply contacted my attorney Miranda Chen via cell phone, briefly explaining the situation and requesting transportation assistance. "I'll be there in 20 minutes," Miranda responded without hesitation. "I suggest everyone remain in current location until I arrive to address any documentation questions facility staff might have." This simple solution, demonstrating practical resources beyond my children's knowledge or control, effectively neutralized their leverage attempt without requiring direct confrontation that might permanently damage relationship possibilities. The remainder of that painful interlude maintained superficial civility while awaiting Miranda's arrival, though meaningful conversation had become impossible given the now explicit control attempt we were all pretending remained unspoken. Miranda's arrival with both Dr. Rao's complete capacity assessment and my recently updated advance directives definitively resolved immediate procedural questions. After brief private consultation with facility counsel that established clear legal parameters, the administrator formally confirmed Mountain View could not accept placement without my direct consent, which I declined to provide. Miranda's offer of transportation resolved remaining practical barriers to departure, creating clear path forward that required no further family involvement. As I prepared to leave with Miranda, final exchange with my children established boundaries necessary for potential future relationship reconstruction while acknowledging painful reality of current circumstances. "I understand you believe you're acting in my best interest," I stated quietly, maintaining dignity that contrasted sharply with their increasingly desperate manipulation attempts. However, today's actions have demonstrated fundamental lack of respect for my autonomy that requires significant reassessment of our relationship. My attorney will contact you regarding next steps. This measured response, neither burning bridges entirely nor ignoring serious boundary violations, maintained possibility for eventual reconciliation while establishing clear consequences for unacceptable behavior, rather than dramatic accusations or emotional recriminations that might provide justification for renewed capacity questions. My calm clarity reinforced the fundamental disconnect between their claims of concern and their actual disregard for my expressed preferences and values. During drive to Miranda's office, where we would address immediate practical considerations, I made decision that would dramatically reshape subsequent family dynamics in ways my children could never have anticipated. Rather than returning to my condominium, which investigation would later confirm they had indeed accessed without authorization to remove personal items as part of their orchestrated transition plan, I would immediately occupy the Harrington property that had been prepared for this contingency. The estate's exceptional security systems, established to protect historically significant property from unauthorized access, would prevent further intrusions while providing comfortable, appropriate, independent living environment. Its proximity to Mountain View, visible from certain facility windows though separated by substantial wooded buffer, created particularly fitting symbolism given their determined efforts to place me in institutional setting against my expressed preferences. The practical transition occurred with remarkable efficiency given the circumstances. Key foundation staff, who had already prepared the property for potential occupancy, implemented final arrangements within hours of my decision. Essential personal items were retrieved from my condominium by security team Miranda arranged, preventing further unauthorized access while avoiding direct confrontation with my children. By evening, I was comfortably settled in historic residence that ironically provided far more gracious accommodation than either my condominium or certainly the Mountain View facility they had attempted to place me in. The following morning, Miranda delivered formal communication to both Elizabeth and James establishing clear parameters for future interactions. The letter, precise in both tone and content, addressed three critical dimensions: legal boundaries regarding unauthorized interventions, financial restructuring protecting assets from further interference attempts, and conditional path toward potential relationship restoration contingent upon demonstrated respect for appropriate boundaries. Most significantly, the communication included property records documenting my residency at Harrington Estate, information that would become relevant when they inevitably attempted to locate me following failed institutional placement attempt, rather than concealing my whereabouts, which might justify renewed concerns about decision-making. The transparency established both my continued independence and the comprehensive planning that refuted any claims of impaired function. The impact of this revelation became apparent that very afternoon when Elizabeth appeared at Mountain View's administrative office demanding information about my unexpected departure. According to facility staff who later described the interaction, she became increasingly agitated upon learning I had left with my attorney, rather than accepting temporary placement pending family discussion, as she had apparently expected. Her subsequent attempts to locate me, initially focused on my condominium where security staff politely but firmly enforced access restrictions, eventually led to foundation offices where she received formal notification of my residence change alongside comprehensive documentation establishing its legitimacy. Witnesses described her visible shock upon reviewing property records for neighboring estate, particularly upon realizing its proximity to the very facility she had attempted to place me in. The symbolic power of this arrangement, grandmother in historic mansion literally overlooking nursing facility where grandchildren had attempted placement, created narrative whose implications extended beyond immediate practical considerations. The revelation demonstrated not just continued independence, but comprehensive planning capability fundamentally incompatible with claims of cognitive limitation or financial management concerns. Most significantly, my residence and property requiring substantial financial commitment and sophisticated preservation management definitively refuted their claims regarding decision-making capacity in particularly visible manner. The arrangement's unassailable legitimacy, involving respected preservation trust, foundation partnership, and transparent financial structures, prevented dismissal as impulsive reaction while establishing unquestionable demonstration of continuing functional abilities. The weeks following this dramatic revelation established new equilibrium within family system. Initial reactions, outrage from Elizabeth, awkward attempt at reconciliation from James, gradually shifted toward reluctant acceptance that their control efforts had not only failed but fundamentally backfired. Rather than achieving increased influence over family resources, their manipulative actions had triggered comprehensive legal restructuring that permanently limited their ability to access assets outside established distribution plans regardless of future developments. Most painfully for them, their actions had dramatically damaged relationships, not just with me, but with extended family members who gradually learned of their behavior through inevitable information diffusion within family networks. Catherine, in particular, expressed profound disappointment upon discovering the manipulation attempts, creating secondary consequence they had clearly never anticipated when initiating their control strategy. For my part, I maintained balanced perspective that neither permanently vilified them nor minimized the seriousness of their boundary violations. The formal communications maintained appropriate legal protections while leaving conditional path toward potential relationship repair should they demonstrate genuine recommitment to fundamental values of respect and autonomy that had formed. Foundation of family system Daniel and I had attempted to establish throughout their development. 6 weeks after the failed nursing home placement, I observed Elizabeth and James standing in Mountain View's parking lot, staring across the wooded buffer toward Harrington Estate where I could see them clearly from bay window in main library, though they remained unaware of my presence. Their extended observation of property, lasting nearly 15 minutes according to security system records, suggested contemplation beyond simple confirmation of my residence. What thoughts occupied them during that silent observation I can only speculate. Perhaps recognition of how thoroughly they had misjudged both my capacity and determination. Perhaps awareness of opportunities lost through prioritizing immediate financial objectives over authentic relationship. Perhaps even beginning reconsideration of values that might eventually create foundation for meaningful reconciliation. Whatever their private reflections, the visible tableau, adult children confronting physical manifestation of parental autonomy, they had attempted to override, crystallized fundamental lesson their actions had inadvertently created. Some principles cannot be efficiently explained or persuasively argued. They must be demonstrated through definitive action that establishes unmistakable truth beyond manipulation or misinterpretation. The mansion neighboring their chosen nursing facility communicated what countless conversations had failed to convey, that respect for autonomy represents non-negotiable foundation for meaningful family connection across generations. The physical proximity created daily reminder that compassionate concern remains legitimate only when balanced with fundamental respect for individual self-determination, particularly regarding those whose wisdom and planning had created the very resources others sought to control. As for my own perspective, I maintained neither bitter resentment nor naive hope regarding future relationship possibilities. The comfortable mansion provided not just practical independence, but philosophical vantage point, balancing appropriate boundary protection with continued openness to genuine connection should authentic value realignment eventually emerge. Some lessons about respecting elders cannot be effectively communicated through rational explanation or emotional appeal. Sometimes the most profound teachings require dramatic demonstration that establishes unmistakable truth through actions whose implications transcend malleable words or manipulated interpretations. The mansion next door to their chosen nursing facility accomplished what years of conversation had failed to achieve, establishing fundamental reality that autonomy deserved respect, not because I demanded it, but because I had definitively demonstrated capacity that rendered alternative interpretations permanently untenable. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.